Okay. Again, welcome to the 23rd Annual Bloom-Futaba Memorial Lectures. Thank you for your patience as I am wearing many hats, not only the MC, but the technical supervisor. We're coming to you live from Hongwanji Betsuin, and both in person and online audiences. I'm Dexter Mar, the honored convener of this event sponsored by Dorothy Mel Bloom, wife of Sensei Alfred Bloom. Thanks to Hongwanji Betsuin for hosting this event and the support of Dave Atchison, John Matsuoka, Ashley Ito, and Colleen Kunishige of the Betsuin staff. Also, thanks to my wife, Faye Mar, who has co-convened with me on Futaba for many years. Like so many COVID-inspired changes, this is the first Bloom-Futaba Memorial Lectures held on a Friday evening, as it's now linked to the annual Kyoto Minister Lay Assistant Retreat Program. Reverend Akahoshi will be wearing multiple hats during his 2-week stay here in Hawaii, as he leads off with the lectures tonight and then joining us with the Minister Assistant Program, then as well as visiting other temples. Okay. So our topic tonight is meditation, mindfulness, and gratitude, the natural path to awakening and joy. We'll be having 2 lectures with a break in between. Lecture 1 will be part 1 of the series. Then we'll have a discussion period led off by George Tanabe, and field any questions that the audience may have. And then we'll have about a 15-minute break and then repeat. Kenji is a graduate of the UCSF Dental School, and also the Institute for Transpersonal or Spiritual Psychology and the Institute for Buddhist Studies. He served 3 years in the Air Force in Japan and had a private dental practice for over 30 years in San Jose. At that time, he also served as the board president of San Jose Betsuin Temple and received his Kaikyoshi in 2012 and served at the Buddhist Temple of San Diego until retiring last year in 2021. He now leads the ministerial support pillar for the Dharma Forward campaign and gives classes for ministers' assistants at BCA. And he's writing a book that interprets the Shin way that's relevant to the 21st century. I think many of you know George. He's been involved in Futaba for, I don't know how many out of the 23 years, but it's been pretty close to all of them. And of course, he's the emeritus professor from UH Manoa in religion, and currently still the president of BDK America, Bukyo Dendo Kyokai. And so we're delighted to have George back again to help us with these lectures that are a gift from Dr. Bloom. Okay. So I will turn this over to Kenji.
Okay. Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak at Dr. Bloom and Futaba lecture. Just want to say, before we start, could you all join me in Nembutsu Gassho? Gassho, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Well, I was lucky to meet Dr. Bloom a long time ago. He was still at the University of Hawaii and was asked to speak at the San Jose Betsuin, and I volunteered to pick him up. So I picked him up, I think in the afternoon, and volunteered to show him whatever San Jose had to offer. Those of you who may have known San Jose a long time ago, it's really just a farm town. And so we don't have much. We have this Winchester Mystery House, and I think that's about it. And I said, well, what's close to Japantown is this flea market. And so he said, okay, let's go to that. So we did go. And along the way, what he bought was this leather coin purse, those little things that hold your coins so it doesn't make holes in your pocket. And so he got that. And many years afterwards, he said he still had that. And anyway, that's the highlight of San Jose. If you ever go, I don't know if the flea market is still there, but it may be gone in a few short years. The other, he was at the in Berkeley for a while as dean, and was there when we had the earthquake in let's see, '89, when they lost the Edison building. And so I would try to see him when I came to Hawaii, not very often, but we'd come here, and the family. I tried to go see him in, I guess it's Wailuku, right, where he lived. Wailuku. No, Kailua. Yeah, I'm getting all my Hawaiian names mixed up. The family would go off to Boots and Chemo for pancakes, macadamia nut pancakes. And I'd call up Al and take him to lunch. And so that was much more valuable. In any event, it was really an honor to be asked to speak at this lecture, which has been named for him and which he supported for so many years. Tonight, I'll be talking about what I feel are some very important things. Right after World War II was a very critical time for Shin Buddhism. It shifted, a big shift from Japanese language to English. And when much of the leadership shifted from the Issei to the Nisei. And so there was a change in language when we were speaking in English. And yet, I think even though sermons and discussions are done in English, there are things that are lost in translation. So tonight I'll be talking about a couple of things. The first half, we'll talk about the barriers that we might have in Shin Buddhism right now that makes it difficult for even our members to really appreciate it. And also to present what I feel is a welcoming and inviting way for people to have an introduction to Shin who have no background in Japanese or Buddhist culture. And in the second half, we'll present a simple process, or actually a practice, where we can begin to appreciate our core practice, which is the Nembutsu, which we started off with tonight. Now, one of the reasons for our confusion is that there's a difference of culture, and we know that. I call it a difference of content and context, because in the US, the individual seems to be supreme. We're always looking for number one. You could win the Super Bowl, but you got to win it 2 times or 3 times. It's always, the person who wins. The goal is the ultimate. And education is done in a way where we question authority. Whereas I think the Japanese method is that education is top down. The masters, the elders who really know something teach downward. And also there's groupthink, where instead of the individual, it's just a cooperation among many people. And there's a strict protocol toward hierarchy. And process is important, and this is where ritual comes in. Now, the other difficulty I think we're having is the difference in time. Shinran talked in a time when the earth was flat. People considered it was flat, and he was speaking to basically peasants in feudal Japan. And now we're in a very universal type life. We're in a digital world. I can't figure out how to work my phone. I can barely work the phone, and it's got all these other gadgets that I can't handle. And that's only a few decades old. So there's a difference. And so I want to give a story to kind of point this out. There's a young man that wants to learn about Buddhism. So he goes to a master and he asks, I'd like to learn about Buddhism as quickly as I can. Can you teach me? And the master sits back and says, yes, I can. And the student is anxious. So he says, well, can we start right now? So the master, seeing that this man is eager, says, okay, we'll do that. But first, let's have some tea. And so the student agrees and they sit down and the master pours. gets 2 cups, and he starts pouring the tea for the young student. And as the cup fills up, the student watches and his eyes get wider as it fills up completely, and the master continues to pour as the tea overflows the cup. So the student says, "Stop, stop," which the master does. And the student asks, "Oh, why do you keep pouring?" And the master gently says, "In order for you to learn, you must first empty your cup." And I think this is what we might be dealing with. We've come with a coffee mug, which may still have some remnants or coffee stains in it. And we're trying to fill it up with, Jodo Shinshu tea. It's going to taste a little funny, not quite right. And what this points out is that we have a history behind this. Everyone does, depending on what history they have. And that tends to influence what they think about a new process and how they think about things in the future. And so our background is very important, and it's very difficult to change these things. One thing that we realize is that when you put the body with thoughts of change, it helps. And change comes faster when we're involved. Now, other schools of Buddhism seem to be growing, Vipassana, Zen, so forth. They're using things like meditation, mindfulness, and so forth. And yet, what about Shin? I like to think about what the former Bishop Yamaoka said. He said that in the West, because we don't have a background, we need an entry-level education process. And so he presented his 6 aspects of Shin. And George was telling me, we met a couple of weeks ago in LA for the Ireicho ceremony that we had. And he was telling me about the architecture of this temple. And I had heard that before about Reverend Imamura designing it in kind of an Indian fashion, whereas many of the temples, like the San Jose Betsuin, is very Japanese-like. And his intent was that he realized Buddhism was new in America, and he wanted it to be American. And so not to replicate all the Japanese aspects, he wanted something that just represented the origins of Buddhism. And yet he had incorporated some other elements. I think he said the columns, the kind of Western, and the arches symbolize some Islamic features. And so Reverend Imamura really had the foresight to really realize that in America, things had to change. And then former Bishop Ogui wrote an article in the Wheel of Dharma. This is our BCA newsletter about 15 years ago. And he talked about Obaku Zen. Are people familiar with Obaku Zen? Okay, one person is. Well, why haven't we heard about that? Well, Bishop Ogui was in Japan, and he went in to visit an Obaku Zen temple, and he said it was kind of like a museum. And what happened was that they continued to bring their teachers in from China, whereas the other 2 schools of Zen in Japan, Eisai and Dogen, went to China, learned and really accepted Zen, and brought it back Chinese Chan as Japanese Zen, with Rinzai and Soto. And so, again, the former Bishop Ogui was saying in this way that it's important that we take on the aspects of an American type of Jodo Shinshu. Now, some things are already very popular. And you notice the first word in the title is meditation. Meditation, mindfulness are very common. And people, you see this all over. A lot of commercial, a lot of ads have this. And so these Buddhist aspects are accepted. We don't have to, promote them. And yet, we should welcome it and not really reject it. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, as I said earlier, physical activity really helps to help us understand or experience something that's new. And it deepens an idea, a concept. So what I like to try initially is meditation. And I don't know how many people do this. Some of you may already have a practice. But I want to just take a few minutes to use this little demonstration so that we can experience what it means to incorporate something physical. And this is why practice is so important in Buddhism, that we bring in the physical body. I should mention, when we hear the word mind in the West, we think only of the cognitive mind. But in the East, when we hear and the Buddha uses the word mind, what he's talking about is the mind, the heart, the body, and the spirit. So it's the whole thing. And so this little exercise we'll do may show this. So if you join me, we'll just do a little exercise in meditation. Now, if you have a meditation practice, go ahead and do that. But for those who may not, you can use these instructions. First of all, you might move forward in your chair so you're not leaning back and feeling too comfortable. You want to think that you have a string tied to the top of your head going to the sky, and your face is looking straight ahead, and so your back is somewhat erect, not real stiff, but it's away from the back of the chair. And you have your 2 feet flat on the floor. And as your face is looking straight ahead, just allow things to relax, starting from the top of your head. You can let your face relax, your shoulders, your arms, your back, your waist and torso. Just kind of feel your thighs relax, your knees, the lower legs, ankles, and feet. And just feel everything begin to relax. And just breathe normally. You might just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then allow your eyes to almost close completely, but leave a little slit open so that you see a little bit of light in front of you. And this is so that you can be in contact with the outside world, although most of what you see is the darkness of the back of your eyelids. And very slowly, inhale and count and exhale. And you might start counting inhale 1, exhale 1. Inhale 2, exhale 2. Now continue. And if you reach the number 10, you might just begin all over again. I'm going to start by hitting the bell, and then we'll just continue this. Your back is straight, your head is upright, you're looking straight ahead, your eyes are almost closed, you feel relaxed in your body. Your hands could be on your lap, palms up or palms down, or if you have a Zen position, you can do that little holding the little egg. And then just breathe in and out, counting each breath. In 1, out 1. Inhale 2, exhale 2, and continue. So I'll hit the bell and then be silent for just a couple of minutes until I hit the bell again, and we'll bring your attention back to the room. So I'll hit the bell and then be silent. very slowly get a sense of your chair and the floor. And at your own pace, allow your eyes to become open and get a sense of the people around you and feel your body. And just bring your attention back to the room. Now, what we just had was an experience. Did you achieve it or did you receive it? And your body may feel a little different. But this was just an exercise in being, just being. Now we're going to do a second part to this exercise. It may be a little difficult for people at home, so you'll have to just imagine it. But I'd like people to pair up. Just find someone close to you. And if there are three, you could do that. There are three here, a couple there, a couple back there. If you can just pair it, we're going to do a little exercise. And yeah, again, you may have to walk across the room. And those of you at home, if there's someone at home, if you can find a partner or just imagine that you're doing this with someone. Okay, well, now what I'm going to do, yeah, introduce yourselves. And what I'll do is I'll hit the bell once and you'll have a little less than a minute to, yeah, I think there's two there, yeah. So I'll hit the bell once and one of you will start and relate how that experience was, what you felt. And then after less than a minute, I'll hit the bell again. And then the next person will relate what their experience was in this meditation. Okay, is that clear? Those of you at home who don't have a partner, just pretend there's someone and explain to someone how that experience of meditation was, okay? So I'll hit this bell once and then I'll hit it again when we switch, okay? Ready, begin. Okay, the first person, try to wrap it up in about 10 seconds. Okay, first person stop, and then the second person relate how that experience of meditation was for you. All right, now the second person will end in about 10 seconds. Okay, you could thank your partner and bring your attention back to the front. It's always enjoyable to connect with others. Now, what this demonstrates are two things. One, the first part, the meditation was an experience. We all had an experience. The second part, the person listening heard a story. They heard an experience of the first person, and then vice versa. The second person gave us his story of his experience to the listener. Now, when we have Dharma talks or we explain things, we're giving out words and ideas, but the listener puts his own experience to those words. And this is what I mean when I say that words have different meanings in a different context. Now, we know that Shinran did not do Sunday Dharma talks. I don't think they had Sunday services in his day, no reason to. They had discussions in little groups called ko. And as he explained things, people discuss things, how it related to their lives. And so this is where I think discussions are very important. And I know most temples have that, but I think it's important that after Dharma talks, we have discussions or opportunities for people to ask questions, because all we have when we hear these things are to put the words into our own experience, and we have no experience, then things are difficult. When we ask people to say, Namo Amida Butsu, and nothing happens, and we say, this is our principal practice, it loses its value. It doesn't have any meaning. And we wonder why people aren't saying the Nembutsu. In his book, Shinran's Gospel of Pure Grace, Dr. Bloom writes that there is a conversion that occurs with the voicing of Amida's name, Namo Amida Butsu. And he uses the term eshin, indicates a turning of the mind. There's no self-effort involved. It's like the metaphor of light. It comes from Amida, it just comes to us, or the efforts of others. Now, there's a story about two monks, brothers. One is very smart and studied the sutras and such. The other brother was a little dim-witted and really, had a hard time understanding a lot of things. And so Buddha advised this second monk that he might just clean the temple yard. And so he gave him a broom. And so as he cleaned the yard, he had to repeat these words, sweep away the dirt, clear away the dust. Sweep away the dirt, clear away the dust. And he just did this every day, cleaning up the temple yard. Until one day he awoke, he really understood at a very deep level. Sweep away the dirt, clear away the clouds of dust. And this is one way we can begin to understand the depth of Shin Buddhism, that it is at a level that is very difficult for some of us to really get. But part of it is, I think, this term practice. And I think there's a misunderstanding when we sometimes hear that in Jodo Shinchi, we don't have a practice. Our practice may be just to, the principal one, of course, is saying the Buddha's name, Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. But it's also to hear. But I think part of this prejudice against meditation comes from, again, something lost in translation. In Japanese, the word zazen means what? Meditation. But it's meditation in order to achieve satori. In other words, it's a means to gain something. And so we just take that interpretation, that translation, and use meditation as a means to achieve, awakening, satori, whatever. But we practice, and I'll make a point of this in more detail. Everything we do has taken a practice. And what I'm talking about is we do need a practice of realizing what we are receiving and have received. And I'll get more detail on this receiving, that we don't achieve in our practice. Our practice is to really realize what we have been receiving. Another difficulty we seem to have is this thought about diminishing our ego. And we think about the word bombu, and akunin. I know Dr. Mark Blum, doesn't like the translation of the word akunin to mean evil person, because evil has a different connotation in Christian America. And he feels that the word akunin could mean ordinary, an ordinary person. But again, saying that we're unable to control our ego and that somehow we must control our ego really goes against what psychology tells us. It is impossible to diminish your ego. You can be called crazy if you don't have an ego. And it takes an ego to survive in our lives. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that again later, but this whole thought about, diminishing our ego really goes against what we as humans can and can't do. Now, monks may do that because they go off and they're often in an isolated situation. But again, I'll go on that. So the two things I'm pointing out here is the difference in time and culture that affects us as a barrier, and our thoughts of, words like practice. Now, how do we achieve something, when we can't control our ego? The thought of balance. Again, the Buddha talked of the middle path. Now, Shinran tells us in Shoshinge, this is in the second chapter on practice, how we might be able to realize awakening, even with our ego. And he writes in Kyogyo Shinsho, still the clouds and mist of greed and desire, anger and hatred, cover as always the sky of true and real Shinjin, or the sky of truth. But though the light of the sun is veiled by clouds and mist, beneath the clouds and mist, there is brightness, not dark. Isn't that an optimistic view? That even with our ego and all these things that bother us, there's light beneath the clouds. So Shinran does tell us, what is possible, that we're receiving this from the effort of others. This light, we could say from Amida, penetrates all this. Now, hearing is a form of receiving. Dr. Tai Tetsuno talks about deep hearing. And when we chant, we receive the sutras, through chanting. And we receive the Dharma through talks. And we often recite the three treasures. And what does that say? Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear them. And it ends saying, even through myriads of kalpas, hard is it to hear to such an excellent and wonderful teachings. Now we are able to hear and receive them. Let us try to understand the Tathagata's teachings. So what did we do to achieve life? I think we just received it. And so I think we need to really realize the Nembutsu as being a practice to realize what we are receiving. And it's important to really establish a practice so that we can do something repeatedly so that this becomes deep within us. It becomes more natural. And so when we hear the word practice, I don't want to associate it with the thought of achieving anything, but in what we are receiving. So we'll talk in the second half on a way we could do this, but I found it helpful to relate a new difficult experience to people who have little background with something that's familiar. And the most efficient and effective way I have found in this is to use the word thank you to really bring out that experience of gratitude. Now, thank you doesn't have to be explained. I think almost all cultures have that word, in different ways. And it's acknowledging that we have received something. And so we do that even with our ego. And so it's an expression of gratitude without having to get rid of that ego. So I kind of think, been running through a bunch of things without the slides. we might go through the slide real quickly, and I'll repeat it very quickly. But slide number 2 is okay, this is Shinran's words. Still the clouds and mist of greed covers always the sky of true and real Shinjin. And beneath the clouds and mist, there's brightness, not dark. And then the next 3. And this is important. Shinran continues, when one realizes Shinjin or awakening and attains great joy, one immediately leaps crosswise, closing off the 5 grave offenses. What happens when you leap crosswise? Let's do this little thing. Put your hand out. If you can take down 3 or shut off the slide. And people, put your hand up to hide my face. This will help you for a few seconds. Now, what happens when I move crosswise? Can you see? So Shinran is saying, just by leaping crosswise, we change our perspective. We see things from a different angle. And so he's saying right here in Shoshinge that by making this shift in everyday life, we don't have to eliminate our ego. We just shift our perspective. And as Dr. Bloom said, changing our minds, making this conversion. And then he continues with slide 4. Shinran says, one is naturally brought to enter a stage of the definitely settled. Solely saying the Tathagata's name, the next slide, one should respond with gratitude to the universal vow of great compassion. He says, respond with gratitude. And Dr. Bloom writes, gratitude as a way of life in Shinshu extends beyond the physical or mental practice of recitation. It also penetrates other areas such as ethics and morality. So the next slide 5. Thank you alerts us to the fundamental uniqueness of Shin practice. It's not a practice of achieving a future goal. It is that we recognize what we are receiving and have received. And we recognize that the present moment is only here because we have received it. And it's due to the efforts of others. And we know that hearing is a form of receiving. So Dr. Uno talks about deep hearing. And as I said, we hear as we listen to the sutras through chanting, we receive the Dharma, and the 3 treasures emphasize the point that we have, we are born and we have received the Dharma. So as I said earlier, using something familiar, and it's 7, slide 7. That's the 3 treasures. The next slide. Using familiar terms to introduce a traditional concept. Some of the words we use traditionally are difficult to understand if we don't have that experience behind it. So it's good to provide a practice that leads to an experience of that concept. And so thank you is that kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be explained. But more importantly, perhaps, is that it doesn't scare people away. They're aware of that. They're used to meditation. They've heard that. They know how mindfulness can help even in business and, anything you're doing when you're focused. And now gratitude. And it's not that we're achieving gratitude. We're recognizing what we have already received. And so one of the things that is difficult is that we've been conditioned to see negative things. And I think this is a survival technique because, if you just skipped along merrily, a lot of dangers could harm you. And so we've been kind of, through evolution, know how to look for danger. And also our news media alerts us to all the bad things that are happening. We hear how bad the economy is and this and that. I think we have it pretty good. And so it's just that we are prone to see negative things. And then what about our economy? It runs on what we lack, what we don't have. So our economy, it runs on please. So I think an easy way to think of this is we're shifting from an attitude of please to acknowledging that we have received and we say thank you. So it's a shift from please to thank you. And that slide, the next slide 9. Yeah, well, okay, 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 that slide, well, if you go back one slide, yeah, this is why I'm saying gratitude is an initial practice for ordinary people. And I think as Japanese, we understand the word arigatai. It seems to be the whole attitude of Japanese, that we're so appreciative of everything. But just bringing gratitude, thank you, into ordinary life is a means of bringing the Buddhist teaching into ordinary life. The next slide. And so again, it's a shift from please, a desire for what I want, to thank you, to appreciate what I've received. So I sometimes hear BCA members ask, you know, how can I explain Shin Buddhism in a short, concise, simple manner? They call it the elevator explanation, where you're riding with someone just a couple of floors and, oh, what's this Buddhism thing? And this, I find, concisely puts things into a short form, which is, I feel, accurate, and yet doesn't have to explain all the things. So the next slide says, the next slide, Shin Buddhism, back when. Shin Buddhism is about appreciating what I have to balance the desire for what I lack. Again, the middle path. Shinran notes that these clouds of darkness, the evil, the greed, and so forth are there, but through the darkness, light shines. So I appreciate what I have to balance that, what I don't have. So it's appreciating these things, and it's to make these unfamiliar terms more relevant to us. And I think it's an accessible gate for ordinary people, for people who have no background in Buddhism or Japanese culture, and it doesn't scare people away. And so I like to end this first part of the talk with Dr. Bloom's, when he says, gratitude as a way of life in Shinshu extends beyond the physical or mental practice of recitation. It also penetrates other areas as ethics and morality. So thank you. And George, you can respond.
Thank you. Is this on now? Yeah. Thank you, Reverend Akahoshi. There was a lot in there, and I would love to respond to some of the comments you made about cultural differences, for instance, the difference between Japan and America, and how important it is to change our cultural styles in our temples so that it fits the culture we live in rather than the culture that the religion came from. So that's a very important and ongoing issue that we struggle with, I think, you know, all the time. I remember talking with a woman who was a member of the Portland Shinshu Temple, BCA temple there. And not knowing anything about the Portland temple, I said, oh, are you having trouble with membership going down? And she said, no, membership is not going down, it's going up. I said, oh, really? That's kind of surprising. It's going against the usual pattern. So how are you managing to draw in more people? She said, we had a years-long discussion, argument within the temple of whether the temple was going to be a Japanese temple or a Buddhist temple. And they decided, she said, we decided that it's going to be a Buddhist temple. And so that just had to be because we're losing so many of the Japanese members. And in order to get non-Japanese members, we had to change the cultural style So she said, we've managed to succeed in doing that, but one of the results is that very few people know how to make sushi. But she said, no problem. We now serve spaghetti. So from sushi to spaghetti, I think is a theme of cultural adaptation. And we could talk a lot about that. The meditation exercise was really interesting. And you mentioned the issue of whether meditation is a self-practice, which in Jodo Shinshu, at least in some interpretations of Jodo Shinshu and maybe older interpretations of Jodo Shinshu, any kind of self-practice is really not to be engaged in because it betrays the trust that you should have in Amida. Amida is going to provide for everything really, and you need to let go of all of the efforts, your hakarai, your wanting to do something for yourself. And it's very hard to do, but that's what you need to do, is let go. And meditation was part of the traditional Buddhist practices that Honen, Shinran's teacher, rejected and said, in the light of Amida's vow, we don't need to practice meditation anymore. He also said we don't have to follow the precepts, don't have to be strict about being celibate, don't have to be strict about liquor and all of that. And this, as you might imagine, caused a huge uproar in the Buddhist world at that time. So in Jodo Shinshu, even in my memory, of the practice of Jodo Shinshu, and it has changed over time, as it should. But I remember a time when here in Hawaii, meditation was a no-no. And I think in BCA churches as well, Bishop Ogui was kind of, revolutionary and kind of a radical in teaching meditation. But he's in the Midwest, he's far away from the headquarters in San Francisco. And so, he could do that. And I knew a Jodo Shinshu minister who would come out to Waialua, where I live on the North Shore in the country, and she was teaching meditation. And I asked her, why you come out to Waialua? She said, God, it's far away from the headquarters. And maybe they won't find out that I'm doing this, because I'd be in trouble if they found out that I was doing this. So there is that issue of whether meditation is a jiriki, a self-power practice. And of course, we could talk a lot about that too. But I want to limit my question to just one question. It has to do with your final words about receiving and achieving and the ego. It seems to me that one way of understanding difference is that receiving is a matter of kind of like letting go of your ego. Because ego is the basis for achieving, I want to do this, I want to go there, I want to. That's all ego. And instead of doing that, which is, please, may I have this or may I have that? It's thank you for what I have. But isn't what I have the result of achievement? Isn't what I have the result of having lived a good life of ego? Of getting, of desiring, and isn't receiving sort of the pleasure for anyone who has already achieved? If I don't have anything, I may still, and I would hope I would be excused for still wanting to exert my ego desires to get more because I don't have enough. But having achieved enough, I now have the pleasure of saying thank you and just being in the receptive mode. So my question is, isn't receiving an achievement?
I'll answer the question on page 12, halfway through my second part of the talk, on what you just said, achieving. I don't think, and well, there are a couple of other things with the context I'll talk about. And this whole thing, and I'm basing some of my things, might be interesting for the Wednesday talk on Jikuen, where I'm giving a current or contemporary scientific view of Jodo Shinshu. Because this thing like ego in psychology, it really tells us it's impossible to do. One of the things is that I have some guidelines I'll be talking to the minister's assistants about. What we're talking about is life and death, also monks and lay people. We are not monks. So there is this difference. And to let go is a real difficult thing, especially as a layperson. So I'll be answering some of the, in some way. If I don't answer tonight, Wednesday, I think I'll get more into that. But hopefully we can question me at the end of this talk, second part.
I think we have a few minutes where we can field questions from our in-person audience. And if there's questions from the Zoom side, you can try to send it to me through chat, and I will try to relay that to Kenji Sensei. So any questions from the in-house audience first? You'll have to speak through the microphone so that the Zoom people can hear. Raise your hand. No takers. Okay. Let me check the Zoom. Okay, seeing nothing in the chat at this time, why don't we go ahead and take a break for. Well, welcome back, everyone. We do have a couple of chat questions. Do you see them on the screen there, Kenji? For those in Zoom land, if you go to your chat, you'll see that there's a question from Nikos about the word, well, it says, the word practice is often used as a crude shorthand for meditation in contemporary Dharma circles. Yet mindfulness and concentration are but two aspects of the Eightfold Path. The 5 precepts are also present in all Buddhist paths. Could you discuss the importance, if any, of the Bodhisattva precepts for Mahayana Buddhists?
Yeah, it's it would be a long answer, but basically, there is a difference between what monks are required to do, which Shinran admitted he was not able to do, and for ordinary people. And I put myself in the category of an ordinary person. And so precepts, Eightfold Path are very helpful on a practical level. But I say, and others have said that there are 2 levels. One, the horizontal, practical, everyday, conventional life. And then we often talk about the vertical, spiritual level. And when we get those confused, it gets difficult. And I think the writings of Shinran Honen, Renyo, all we're talking about the spiritual level. Very difficult level. We're talking about life and death, letting go, saying I could die anytime. That's not the usual conversation. I think I'll probably touch on that a bit, I think in this talk. Yeah, I really don't see practice as achieving. I'm just making that differentiation. There's a lot to be criticized, and that's fine. But I'm making a point that unless we give a very simplistic, understandable, relatable way of offering the essence of Shin, we will not get to a second step. In Jikoji, I'll talk about a second step besides thank you. But unless we get that person back a second or third time, they're not going to hear the deep benefits that we have regarding life and death and things that monks achieve. And yet, like I said, one of the dim-witted brother who was sweeping the temple yard woke up just by sweeping the temple yard and saying, clear away the dust. And he understood what the Buddha meant by that. So probably not a complete answer, but
I think this might be in George's wheelhouse as a Mahayana scholar. Would you like to make a comment about the Bodhisattva precepts for Mahayana Buddhists?
Yeah, just briefly, the precepts are rules about what you should do or shouldn't do. And that takes effort, that takes intention, that takes desire. You need to want to do good. You need to want to not do bad. And so there's the exercise of the ego. There's the exercise of your intention, of your desire to follow the rules. And so there's a kind of a bind when we talk about needing to let go of following rules, because the rules require effort. They require planning sometimes, and so it's a very deliberate kind of lifestyle that you choose to do. And it's kind of an irony that if you become or if you became a Buddhist monk or nun in very traditional kind of early Buddhism, you had to follow a lot of rules, which is why the Mahayana precepts came up. There are 350 rules for 250 for monks and 300 and I forget how many for nuns. The reason being, as was explained a long time ago, this is not my interpretation or a modern interpretation, but women were more prone to evil desires, and so they needed more rules. And so there was 300 something for women and fewer for men, because men are somehow more naturally virtuous, I guess, which we all know is not true. What a sign. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm a man. I plead guilty. I have been condemned by the sacred sound of the microphone.
I thank God she's mad at us.
Yeah, high tech has gotten back at us, but yeah, that's a sign. But it's a sign for a good thing, because again, I was talking about an ancient attitude about the difference between the virtuous qualities of men and women. But Mahayana is an attempt to try to move away from that rule-based kind of religion. You can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, so many hundreds, literally hundreds of rules. And Mahayana tried to kind of boil it down to just the most essential, the most basic rules. And this expresses a kind of a confidence in people being able to do what is right and do what is wrong without having to be told in explicit detail about what is right and what is wrong. And so that expresses the Mahayana spirit of moving away from a kind of a rule-based religion, as earlier Buddhism was, and moving more towards a kind of a open system whereby morality, evil doing, was handled not by me having to correct myself, but was handled by me availing myself or entrusting myself to a higher power, a greater power. Call it deity, call it absolute existence, call it Amida, call it Kanon, call it Dainichi, call it. Mahayana is full of deities who forgive. And over in Mahayana literature, it says, even if you have done something wrong, this is not just Shinshu, but every Mahayana tradition says, even if you have done something wrong, you can be basically forgiven. You can basically have your good karma washed away if you perform this ritual, or if you do something good, or there are any number of ways in which you can counteract your evil deeds. But the great appeal of Mahayana is that I'm not alone. I don't have to live the perfectly moral life all alone like I had to in earlier Buddhism. Now I have the assistance of greater powers in the pantheon of Mahayana deities.
Great, thanks, George. I think the Jan Youth's question might be something that Kenji will be addressing in terms of, when and how do we notice our ego to delay its influence? So is that right, Kenji?
Not sure if I'll be answering that, but we'll see after, she could
Okay.
repose the question.
Yeah, we'll see if it's not answered, then we can loop back to that. Okay, but why don't we go start your lecture 2 at this point?
All right, thank you for coming back. Now, I'll start by saying that in ancient times, people did not know that much, and so things, deep truths were explained in mythology. And we tried to explain the things that were written then in terms of mythology and try to explain it at a very practical level. It's actually at a college level. IBS, Institute of Buddhist Studies, is a postgraduate level of school. And so what I'm proposing is just an introductory level. It's making it easy for anyone coming off the street to hear that life could be better if we look at life with the sense of gratitude. And so what we might realize is that up until about 100 years ago, death was a major problem. In other words, I just broke my elbow. If this had happened a couple of 100 years ago, my family would starve. I couldn't work. I've had cancer of the bladder, some other medical issues, and I would be dead because there was no cure. But because of science, technology, research, all this, we have put death as kind of secondary. We're not so concerned with that. And why do I say that? Look at COVID. For the first time, ordinary people could die just by being in a crowd. And so what did we and parts of the world do? We ignored death. We had all these warnings and people would not get a vaccine or wear a mask because, death was something that was foreign. So what we're concerned about is, just kind of practical life. And yet what was written was really written about life and death issues, very deep, complicated issues. And words like, pure realm, bodhisattva, shinjin, they're deep spiritual issues and they're difficult to communicate. As I said, you throw out a word like this, and if you don't have an experience of it, then, it gets difficult. And even this shift from please to thank you, if people were to come to our service, they see us with our hands together. And we talk about the left hand representing ourselves and the right, Amida together and so forth with the Nenju. But when people see us in this posture, facing an altar and saying Namo Amida Betsuin, it really looks like we're saying, please, I would like to go to the Pure Land. What can I do? If I say Namo Amida Betsuin enough, will I go there? And so it is this mistaken thought of Nembutsu. And so this is why I'm putting gratitude or thank you in, because it is quite profound, but I think we need this entry level. And so I've titled this talk, Meditation, Mindfulness, and Gratitude. And I think it really talks about the essence of Shin Buddhism. Shinran talked about explicit and implicit. Explicit kind of meant words, what it really sounds like. Implicit is a deeper meaning that you have to kind of search for. And I'm hoping that with these physical practices, we can get the implicit meaning. Again, like this monk who was sweeping the court. Now, this physical action is important. I went to school at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. One of the core courses at the beginning was Aikido. Why would you take Aikido at a school of psychology? As a psychologist, you're working with a client and you're trying to really understand what's going on in their life and work with them so that you can reveal, what is going inside of them. What do you do in Aikido? You physically are engaging your opponent physically, healing his energy, having that person feel your energy. You're dancing. They call it musubi. this, and so this physical action really helps a psychologist, clinical psychologist, really understand what they're doing with the client, not just talking and trying to, change them, but physically working with them. So this physical activity, I think, is important. BCA has the thing, we have a new logo that just says BCA Life of Gratitude. And so I think it's good that we are becoming known as a religion of gratitude. But also, I think we should be known as a religion of science, because when we say something, we can back it up with science. Now, can you turn on the slides? The 11, if there are any numbers there. These thoughts and things I've been saying is not an alternative. No, it's the first step. Again, this is to bring people in. It's not real clear, very simplistic, but people see there are benefits to being a Shin Buddhist. And there is some response, some benefit by being grateful. They see something happening. So I think this is a missing step. They talked about Reverend Yamaoka and Reverend Nobui realizing that we need an introductory level to explain, to make this connection. Thank you really is, will clarify things. Now, let's see the next slide. Now, when we say the Buddha's name, Namo Amida Butsu, I just want to go over this a little bit to clarify things. Many of you know this already, but Namo Amida Butsu equals Nembutsu. And Nembutsu literally means to be mindful of the Buddha. Namu being, I take refuge in, or I am one with. Amida, the words Amida, is, let's see, next slide, is a Japanese word that combines two Sanskrit words. Amitabha, immeasurable light. We often say wisdom. Amitayus, limitless life, compassion. And then I use this word that we may even use the term efforts of others. I'll explain that later with this Tadiki Jidiki thing. But again, these are very common words, and yet people can identify with them. Okay, that's, now Nembutsu goes much deeper than thank you. And as Dr. Bloom mentioned, yeah, it really can point to something else. And this is the implicit meaning of that. Light and life. Light is everything on this planet. We may be a portion of a star. I think they said 4.5 billion years ago, this planet came to be. And somewhere along the way, about 3.5 billion years ago, life started, maybe some organic roots. So Amida captures all the physical phenomena we know on this planet. Light, which comes from the sun, and light, which is things that can replicate itself. And so it really encompasses everything, all life forms. The next slide. So this life of gratitude is really talking about, and when I say the efforts of others might be used instead of Amida, it points to something that we might relate to. It relates to not only efforts of others, of humans, but animals, plants, minerals, all the sacrifice that has gone on this planet for 4.5 billion years. Now, also, geology, astronomy, evolution, all this has taken some effort. We may not realize it, but some cells, single cells, made an effort to become complex cells. And out of that, we began to have some animal life. Plant life first, perhaps, and then animal life. But all these things kind of happened, and it took effort. We don't know quite what this effort was, but this is what Amida represents, life and light. And I'm using the term effort of others, like thank you, because it is relatable. We can realize that there was efforts of others that caused us to be here and that sustained us. We could think about how we enjoy a meal. How has that happened? Well, it took a farmer to raise vegetables and animals. It took someone to bring it to market, process that, bring that to the grocery store so that we can have all this good food wrapped in plastic. People had to go out and buy it, come home, cook and prepare that. So all of this took efforts of others for us to enjoy a meal. And so we say, if you're typically Japanese and appreciate things, Namo Amidabutsu itadakimasu, just honoring the food and all the effort that has gone into making that. Now, to make this point, and this is to answer the question you asked earlier, whether this is achieving or receiving. As it said in my biography, I went to dental school, and I did go to UCSF, which I feel is one of the top dental schools in the country. And I was very proud of my achievement. And I knew I got there because I studied hard in high school, didn't mess around too much, worked hard in college, and got in. And so I saw that my achievement in getting this degree was, something I really achieved. Now, later on, as an older adult, I look back, and then I began to realize that I remembered that my father worked 7 days a week after camp. He owned a grocery store before camp, just started an ice cream grocery, lost it all in 1942, came back in 1947, and worked as a clerk for someone else. And then I remembered that my mother worked at a Japanese store just part-time. And I didn't even really notice that she started working full-time at a children's clothing store, to support my education in dental school. And then I thought about the school. Well, of course it was there, but it took someone to develop that school. Someone 100 years ago thought that we need a dental school, and they started that. And there were instructors that took a big cut in pay to teach. And we had some fantastic instructors. And before that, I had people who taught me in high school and college. So many teachers, elementary school. All these things represent the efforts of others. And so my achievement, really, I felt, was the result of the efforts of others. Of course, they were paid, they did it because they had skills and so forth, but I was receiving all this. And I go back to the initial being born and our meditation. Are we receiving this, or did we achieve it? The first at least 3 or 4 years of our lives, we had to have received the care and feeding of others. And so 15 or the next slide. So thank you does acknowledge all these things, that it's the efforts of others. And Namo Amida Butsu shows that we are being mindful of the Buddha. And we're reminded of our interdependence. Now, I think that my story is similar to many of yours. Whatever station you have in life, if you look back, you achieved a certain level of accomplishment. And yet, if you look behind, all the things that you did, there were people and instances, everything that supported you, whether they knew it or not. And this is what I think we refer to when we say Namo Amida Butsu. We're saying thank you at a very deep level to those unknown causes that has really enabled us to be who we are today. Okay, we could turn that one off. I wanted to explain this word efforts of others, we have the two words jidiki and tariki. Jidiki using, I guess these are correct translations of self-power, and tariki meaning other power. And yet it's hard for me to relate to other power. What does that mean? And for other power, it refers to Amida. And again, I don't mean to be sacrilegious or anything, but again, at an entry level, the efforts of others, I think, is more inviting. And again, it looks at all the things that have gone on throughout the evolutionary process, where the planet was formed, somehow life began and evolved to a point where primates had an opportunity to develop this thing called the brain, and then it developed into what we call consciousness, this whole ability to be aware, to wake up. And that happened. And what the Buddha is doing is explaining that in mythological form. And so this vow of the Bodhisattva Dhammapada, saying these 48 vows, becoming Amida Buddha, is a mythological way of saying that we're here, again, because of the efforts of others. And again, I'll be explaining this Wednesday night from a scientific viewpoint. So the next slide. Okay, thank you acknowledges that our okay, that we've been supported in Namo Amida Butsu being mindful of the Buddha, but also I have found that, you know, having these terms, and the next slide is one way is to provide a practice, something we do physically, so that these familiar, unfamiliar terms become more familiar. And so it's to provide a practice. Now, we are interdependent, and you know, we talk about that a lot, but again, doing something physically helps us. When we think of Japan, I think that Buddhism, and perhaps Shin Buddhism, because it's the largest sect of Buddhism in Japan, influenced Japanese culture. And there's so much about thinking of the other person, this interdependence. You know, it's taken a while that for us as Americans to think of the other person first. It's very difficult to translate these ideas of MBO, you know, not taking that last piece of manju or something, because we're a me first society. And yet Japan does have this attitude of kind of a combined interdependent society. I'd also like to think that it can go too far. When you bring a whole suitcase full of omiyage to Japan to give to relatives and friends, you think, great, got rid of all that. You come back with 2 suitcases full of omiyage from them when you come home. So all these things can have a different effect, you know, if you go too far. Next slide. Now, what I found was I have 2 grandsons, and they've taught me a lot. And again, they show me that it takes a practice to learn anything. If you think about it, the 2-year-old is reminding me what I saw in the 7-year-old, and that it takes a while to learn how to stand and even to walk. And after a while, he can skip, and eventually you can dance. Learning to talk, you learn letters, and then words, and then sentences, and then eventually it gets to conversations, and then discussion. So all these things initially take a concentrated effort. And driving a car, anything we do, any skill takes a practice. Driving a car, I can remember my oldest cousin, when she was driving the car and we were all in there, we said, you know, hey, turn on the radio. And she's driving and she says, I can't, I'm driving. She was concentrating. And now, you know, when we drive, we're sipping coffee, putting on makeup, listening to, earphones and so forth. But anyway, all the things, learning how to cook, playing an instrument, playing a sport, takes a concentrated practice. And so just this thing about saying thank you and Nembutsu, we just don't say, say Nembutsu. I think a conscious practice really helps. I'll quickly go through this scenario. it takes kind of selective seeing. In a family, by demonstration, there's a family of 4 walking down the street. This is a fantasy. People don't walk down the street in a family, and we drive to the corner grocery. But anyway, the father sees a broken rain gutter. Mother sees decorations on the door. The young teenage son sees a hot sports car in the driveway, and the little girl sees a kitten in the shrubs. But the mother doesn't see the broken rain gutter. The father doesn't see any decorations on the door. The son doesn't see the little cat, and the little girl doesn't see the sports car. And the reason is we all have selective seeing. We see what interests us. Now, my cousin lived with my grandmother, who was known as a devout Shin Buddhist. And once she broke a plate and she said, "Oh, the broken plate, this is good for the potter." How many of us could say that? Break a plate and think of the other person. Now, I don't think she could have said that when she was a teenager, when my grandmother was young. But it took a lifetime of practice of thinking of the other for her to do this naturally. Now we look at Saichi, and he says, "Oh, Saichi, where's the land of bliss? My land of bliss is right here. Where is the line of division between this world and the land of bliss?" And he says, "The eyes are the line of division." So how do we develop a selective seeing for gratitude? And this is where the title of my talk, Mindfulness, Meditation, Mindfulness, and Gratitude, comes in. And someone asked about the Eightfold Path. I'm using the Eightfold Path as a means of not achievement, but seeing how we receive. So can you show the next slide? And I'm using it in kind of a reverse fashion than we usually see it. And I like to use the word wholesome rather than right views, right thoughts, right speech, and so forth. I like the words wholesome meditation, wholesome mindfulness, and so forth. But anyway, this is something that's different and often not talked about, but I'll be sharing a kind of a process. Now, it is important to provide this practice. And although we can see gratitude in many aspects of life, we may not respond to that. And so for Americans, this is something new. You just don't say, be grateful. It's like saying, Amida Buddha acceptance. Feel like you're accepted. These are very difficult feelings. And so it does take a practice. And so what I would suggest is doing this practice in the morning. Okay. Let's see. We'll keep it on this slide, I guess. Okay. In the morning, as we did earlier, just sit for a moment in a meditation posture. And just close your eyes, hopefully it will be quiet. And in this posture, think of something that you can find in your ordinary life that you can express appreciation, say thank you. And let's say it's a light switch. And so it takes mindfulness to keep this in your mind. That takes some effort. And during the day, when you come to a light switch, you turn it on, that's conduct. And you say, thank you. And the thought is gratitude. Oh, okay. And you say thank you because somehow that light switch got there through electricians, Tesla, whoever invented electricity and the whole bit for you to turn on the light switch. And so we have speech, we have thought, and it changes our perspective. It's not just something that should be there, but it lights up. And so we can say thank you. So for a week or so, think every time you turn on a light switch of saying thank you. This runs through the Eightfold Path backwards, something we're receiving. And this is the practice that I think we can use. Now, for some of us, we could bypass the thank you and go straight to the next level where we say, thank you, Namandao. Thank you, Namandao. We can just say Namandao. And namandabs is that word that sometimes I'm old enough to remember Issei and people in our community who might just be saying namandabs at any time. And so it is this practice of realizing what we are receiving all around us. And that this practice, which is very, conscious, and I know Shinran talks about, not doing things consciously, but I think this is different in the sense of realizing that we are receiving from others, and this is our relationship with Amida, that we receive these things. Next slide. Now, one of the most effective means of remembering this is coming to a stoplight. When we do that, you see a yellow light, you want to go past it. Slow down and stop at a yellow light, have it turn red. What that means is the people going in the other direction have the right of way, interdependence. That stoplight is probably there because there have been accidents, but it allows others to go first. And so you have a minute to kind of relax. But again, it's the me within the we. We're interconnected with others, but it's a time that we can say thank you. Okay, you can turn that off. And what I'm suggesting is like a new diet. If you can do this for a while, perhaps the second week you could try something else. Think of a water faucet. Every time you turn on a water faucet, you say thank you, namandab. And then think of something else. Turning the engine on in the car. Thank you, namandab. And we begin to see that everything around us is a result of the efforts of others, the compassion of Amida. If others have made it possible for our lives to be as it is, it shifts us from this whole idea of monku, complaining about what we don't have, to really begin to appreciate things that we enjoy. We have life so much better. And if we think about the Issei pioneers and Issei who suffered through depression, being an immigrant, going through incarceration during World War II, our lives are pretty good. We have complaints, of course, but then it's this whole attitude. Again, if we look back 800 years, 500 years, our life is so much better. So these are the things that I think help us begin to realize all the different benefits that we have been receiving. But we have to do this practice. If you don't go home and actually try to do this next week, this talk is like any other Dharma talk. It may feel good, it may sound good, but unless we do a practice, physically involve ourselves into something, becoming aware that we are receiving these things. This, again, is just the first step in our recitation of Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. So what happens if something happens where thank you is insufficient? There's a tragedy or just something that is so terrible that thank you just doesn't cut it. We have to realize we're ordinary people. We're not monks. And often people think, well, you're a Buddhist, they expect us to be emotionless, that we can ride above these. No, we're ordinary human beings. And so when things happen that are really terrible, feel that. There is pain, there is suffering. And when we feel that emotion and are one with it, it will pass in time. It's when we resist these things. So remember, we are not monks, we're ordinary people. Next slide. So I just want to review the process that we've been talking about. And it's really the Sanghas of the past that have carried these ideas to us today, the Dharma. And if I see this in my 2-year-old son, that he's learning to say please a lot faster than he's learning to say thank you. And so these words and these practices are difficult. It's going to take a while for us to, become used to it. And we may have said thank you thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, automatically, oh, thank you, thank you. And yet one day it may hit us. We may say thank you just naturally, automatically, when we realize that we have received a gift, perhaps that we didn't expect. And so again, this practice is kind of putting us in the category of my grandmother, where it became natural to her. Now, I like to make a comparison that this thank you could be like, if you have seen the first movie of the Karate Kid, it could be like that. This boy Daniel wants to become a karate expert. And so he goes to his teacher, Miyagi, and he says, I want to learn karate. So Miyagi has him do what? Paint a fence. Then he has him wax his car. And Daniel's kind of upset because he wants to learn karate. And all he's doing is waxing this guy's car, painting his fence. Until he realizes later on that these are the fundamental motions for karate, up and down, circular motion. So I think thank you is like that. It's just, oh, thank you. But it leads to a deeper appreciation of Nenbutsu. Next slide. Okay. We have this Ondok-san, and part of the words are here. The depth of gratitude I owe my Dharma teachers. I would express until my bodily form is finally shattered. So we just don't say thank you. There's a response after that. And that response is to repay our teachers. And I think all our temples do this. Next slide. This is the Buddhist temple of Alameda. And what you see here are 4 wheelchairs that were decorated for Obon. And these were for their members who are past the age of 80 who weren't able to be on their feet to dance in Obon. And so they decorated these wheelchairs, had them sit there and push them around the Obon where they, were able to do the hand gestures of Obon. And there are many things like this at all our Shin temples. So we do have this activity of appreciating, those who went before us. So next slide. So the voicing of Namo Amida Butsu is spiritual. And I make this differentiation that I think we have a very practical realm that we live in. We're not concerned with death so much. If I die, I'm going to sue somebody. I want stress relief. I want to be peaceful. I want to have peace. But Namo Amida Butsu brings us into the spiritual realm. And so as mature adults, I think we can go beyond this feel-good stage. What Reverend Matsumoto talks about, kind of the feel-good stage of Buddhism that many Americans kind of think Buddhism is about this, practical level. And yet it is the spiritual level. And if you get to an age like I am, these things, as we get older, these things begin to matter. The Buddha talked about 3 things. Specifically sickness, old age, and death. Now, these 3 things don't have good answers in the practical world. They can only really be answered in the spiritual realm. So this is where we find that the practice of gratitude leads us into that spiritual realm. And this is where, as Dr. Bloom says, it goes beyond gratitude. And it really affirms us. It affirms our interdependence. It shows us humility, respect, harmony. We're really affirmed and accepted. And so it really goes way beyond this thought of gratitude, but that is the opening gate. And it is about life itself. And in this journey, our life becomes brighter. And we realize that nothing is ordinary. Everything can be sacred. Next slide. Reverend Dr. Taiketsu Uno talks about deep hearing. And Bishop Harada talks about truth level. So I think what Shinan and Renyo Honen were talking about is a very deep level, but we do need this entry level. Now, again, I'd like to close with the words of Dr. Bloom, where he says, conversion, this shifting, occurs with the voicing of Amida's name. And he says it indicates a turning of the mind. that we realize all the things that we complain about that we don't have, but we turn our minds to appreciate what we have. And he says, gratitude is a way of life in Shinshu that extends beyond the physical or mental practice of recitation. It also penetrates other areas such as ethics and morality. So next slide. I want to end with this story. And this story is about a little farmer who had a wife and a couple of kids. This is a modern picture, but it gives you an idea of a large valley. He had a hard life. It was very hard to earn a living growing his rice and vegetables. And every morning, you know, as he got up, the sun behind him would shine across this huge valley. And across the valley, on the slopes just beginning on the other side, he would see the sun reflecting off the golden walls of a very rich man's house. And he thought, that man is so rich, he has walls that he's, you know, had covered in gold. And he thought, you know, if I go over there, this man is so rich, perhaps he can give me a little bit of money to help us. So he shares this thought with his wife, and she thinks it's a good idea. So she makes him a lunch and some musubi and some tea. And so early one morning, he starts off on this end of the valley and just walks and walks and walks across to the other side. Halfway there, he stops and eats his lunch. And he continues to walk. And it's nearing the end of the day as he reaches the other side. And as he reaches the other side, he starts to climb. And he's getting very excited because he only has to go around one bend and he'll see the house. And he's just ready to, you know, ask this very rich man if he could just afford a few pieces of gold to help him. And so as he rounds this corner, rising up this little hill, he comes to a place where he should see the house. And then his mouth drops open. Because instead of seeing a beautiful house surrounded by a golden wall, he sees an old abandoned shack. And that shack has a window facing his farm. And then he realizes that, oh, you know, it was all in his mind that he thought this golden wall that he saw was perhaps simply a reflection of the rising sun that rose behind his house. He's so dejected, he just sits down on the rock, turns around and looks back at his house. And as he does that, the sun is setting behind him. And he looks up to see his house. And he's surprised because what he sees is a golden wall. And it's the setting sun reflecting off the window of his house. And he realizes that although he's had a hard life, he has a nice little farm, a wife, a couple of kids. And so he has this conversion, this turning of the mind, and appreciates what he has. And all that he can do is put his hands together and recite the language. So please join me in closing this section. Nembutsu Gasho, Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.
Well, thank you very much for that talk, which was really put in very practical, you might say, but still profound terms. That the ordinary is sacred, that what might seem very matter of fact can be actually very profound. And so the whole thing about, you know, gratitude, I think is a kind of a reflection, if I might say so, Kenji, of you getting old. And, you know, you talk about at my age, and, you know, as I told you during the break, no, please say at our age, you know, you start to think about things that you never thought about before. But there is a way in which I think maybe older people can appreciate gratitude more than younger people. Younger people take things for granted, and it's all please, please. I mean, your grandson says, please, you're lucky. My grandson doesn't even say, please. I mean, you know, it just, he wants this, he wants that. So there's a kind of reflection, I think that is coming from you as I hear it, as coming from somebody who has had many experiences, a long life, a life that has been blessed with good education, good profession, good wife, and who still practices the Japanese custom of omiyage, which I just got. Thank you so much. Thank you for the omiyage. But yeah, I think it sounds simple. It sounds really simple, but it's really coming from the wisdom of somebody who has lived through a long life and has had the pleasure now of being able to reflect on that and to come to certain conclusions. And it seems to me that really there's nothing more profound than, say, gratitude, or more profound than love. I mean, what could be more profound than something simple as, caring for somebody, or caring for something, or caring for a group of people. And I guess in my old age, I can kind of share and appreciate with you that sense of how profound something as simple as that is. I have a friend who has a rock band in LA. He's this big howly guy with a ponytail, and he's lived a kind of a wild life, but he sort of settled down and got married, and now he has two rather attractive daughters. And I remember being in a conversation, and he was asked, "Oh," he said, your daughters are really beautiful. They must have a lot of guys who are interested in them. How do you handle that? You must set down certain rules for your daughters about how they should conduct themselves in dealing with being very attractive." And he says, "Yeah, well, I have two rules. The first rule is no drugs. And the second rule is say thank you." He said, "That's it." And it actually kind of works, And I have to tell you that, yeah, he's kind of like our age. And so I think it's a reflection of his age, where maybe when he was younger, he might say, don't do this, don't do that, and all of this. But, just, be mindful of what you have been given, and be thankful for what you have been given. And so say thank you. I thought your take of the Eightfold Path was really interesting. And that is that the Eightfold Path is a way of receiving rather than achieving, because normally we think of the Eightfold Path as achieving. This is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. Again, like we talked about earlier with the precept, there are rules for how you're supposed to conduct your life, and you need to follow those rules, and you need to be obedient to those rules, and you need to exert effort in order to carry out those rules. But the way in which you're looking at it as a way of receiving rather than achieving, and the example you used was mindfulness, about the light switch, about how much effort went into the development of electricity and the light switch and the people who built it, and so on, that mindfulness is not so much a kind of a practice of what you're going to achieve. I'm going to meditate now so that I can become enlightened, or so that I can become whatever it is you want to become. And to kind of turn that around and to say that mindfulness in the Eightfold Path is a practice of gratitude. And it's practice, again, is effort. And yet gratitude is sort of like, has that element of letting go of all the kind of planning and scheming and devising that we have to do. And so it's a really interesting way of looking at the Eightfold Path. So my question, I guess, is really kind of a request, and that is, would you kind of go through some of the other parts of the Eightfold Path as a practice of gratitude as you see it, rather than as a practice of achieving? Say, let's take right living. Yeah. So how do you look at that?
Actually, I'm not looking I'm not looking at a lot of different things. I'm keeping it simple with gratitude. And that my point is that we use familiar words. And this is where I'm saying a shift from please to thank you, because we live in a world of please in America and shifting to thank you. But the second point is that it takes a practice. Everything we do has taken a practice, if you think about it. Again, I learned this from my grandsons. And so if we're going to live a life of gratitude, it takes some steps. And so physically, we need to do something every day. And this is why I say, if tomorrow you do this short meditation and, become aware of the light or the water faucet, that's good. Things will begin to, you begin to appreciate things. If you don't, then okay, talk. And we'll see what he says next week. And so we're in this mode of discussion, talking, and like our exercise and meditation and giving a story, we're talking to people and they're coming up with their own idea. What is gratitude? But gratitude is something each of us can experience, and we have our own feelings about that. But it does take physical practice to have it become natural. And so I haven't gone to other things of living, and I'm just using the Eightfold Path because this is what the Buddha said works. And so I know sometimes people just memorize it in some easy way, but I find that it is a process, and it fits in with this practice of becoming aware of things that we see.
One more quick question, and that is that I've talked about this sense of gratitude coming about amongst people who have had a long and good life to live. For younger people, I think it's a little harder to have that sense of gratitude, even though we tell our kids and our grandkids, say thank you, or be grateful for what you have. You have so much more than what we have, and so on and so on and so on. If one of the challenges for Jodo Shinshu and every other temple, for that matter, is to draw in younger people, you think gratitude can become an effective message for younger people, that they can respond to it and go, oh yeah, I see that. Yeah, this is interesting to me.
I don't know if it's our goal to attract younger people. I just say things that whoever is interested will follow, regardless of their age, and it may be older people. We put a lot of emphasis in Dharma school. I'll be talking about the human growth process. And there is an initiation process where in more simpler times or in ancient times, people went through an initiation process. And that meant that from childhood, there was a leap into adulthood when they realized death. They realized I could die. In modern times, it might be the military. But when you realize that you could die, then things become spiritual. But yeah, with younger people, it would be harder. But I think we're at a point where we have so much to give. People are looking for something, and we just see through history it has affected Japan. China. Buddhism has gone through all these countries, adopted ways that country behaves. In China, I think they said, "What do you mean you wear a robe without? It's cold here. What do you mean you don't eat pork?" In Japan, they said, "What do you mean you don't drink alcohol?" In America, we're loose with everything. But it's just providing a method that has worked over 2,600 years. Shinran, the last 800 years, has said this is for common people who have an ego, who have to survive, and yet realize that we're still receiving. And so I think Shinran really was a giant. And as I said, these are implicit ways that he was describing things. And basically all I'm saying is the mythology should stay there, all the deep lessons should stay there, but we need an entry level where that person comes back a second time and says, that sounds interesting. That's something I could do. Well, I did this for a week and I felt a little better, realizing all the things that I've received. And we've had people say that. And this is what we were doing in San Diego. I was doing it with the discussion groups in San Jose about a decade ago. And people respond to that who have no background. because this is something they can relate to.
Mhm.
And they have a physical experience of something that benefits their life.
Mhm.
And again, people will have different ideas and it expands,
Mhm.
however it expands. I don't have a set way, but this is one way to introduce people to a different way of thinking.
Mhm.
And we're at the point now where we're the richest country in the world, and look at all the complaints we have. This mindset of gratitude really could be helpful. This whole ecology thing that, gimme has resulted in us polluting the earth. And, it's very convenient for me. I don't know how it's going to be for my son and especially my grandson. But it's sure convenient for me to use all the hot water to drive this car, so forth. And so realizing that we're receiving this, the next step, and I'll be talking about this later, is how we look at the future. Am I part of the vow of helping others wake up to see that we're interdependent and that we don't go just to, nirvana and think, oh, I made it. No, it's the balance. Life is dynamic. And so ordinary people, we're just trying to balance our life because tomorrow it's going to change and I'm going to have to balance again. But it is to realize that, oh, it's gimme, please, please, please. I think, I'm feeling bad about that. If I say thank you, I come back to balance.
Mhm.
So I think it's pretty fundamental and it's something we could practice. It's something that anyone can do where they actually experience, a benefit.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Dexter, do we want to open it up to?
Yeah, we do actually have a chat question, another one from Nico, so I'm going to put it up here so you can read it. Yeah, it's this one here on the bottom half. Talks about a gratitude, keeping a gratitude journal.
Right. Yes, anything, there's so much out there. And one of the things that upsets me, I just saw that this woman wrote a book on meditation, mindfulness, and helping her reduce her suffering. She didn't mention Buddhism at all. And yet I would say she's practicing Buddhism. And she's saying how, she felt so much better doing these things. She's doing Buddhist practice. I think gratitude is a Buddhist practice, a Shin practice. And so this is a simple way. A gratitude journal is a little more involved. Yes, that's fine. But I think we need to take ownership of a lot of these things that we're providing America and putting our stamp on them. Otherwise, you're going to hear Guru such and such say, well, this is where, what's her name, Marianne Williamson? Yeah, she talks as if she invented all this stuff.
Mhm.
And, she's collecting all this money, running for president. But this is Buddhist thought. And so whatever helps you, and these gratitude journals are great, commitment to exercise and so forth. A lot of these things are great, and yet they could be too burdensome initially. Even this Eightfold Path. So, try for a week, realize that after 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to drop it, and then you might pick it up again in a couple of months. But doing something physically really incorporates it within your own habit patterns.
Yeah, I've had the same experience too. There was a book several years ago written by a guy named Eckhart Tolle. And I forget the title of the book, but it's a huge bestseller. He was on Oprah and everything. So I thought, oh, I should read this book. It's so popular. When I was reading, I said, hey, this is Buddhism, but he never credits it, but the ideas are all there and they're wildly popular. But Buddhism doesn't get the credit, and the guy instead becomes fabulously rich.
Yeah, maybe we can loop back to Jan Youth's question about, when and how do we notice our ego and delay its influence? I guess maybe that's from a transpersonal psychologist, viewpoint. What do you do with this stuff in us?
This is where our ego is always in play. And this is where I think Shinran's integrity allowed him to admit his ego. And this term he used, akani, I'll be talking with the minister's assistant. In those days, he just said, it's me, I'm the evil person. It's like saying when I was in elementary school, the atom is the smallest piece, single matter. Of course, when I was in elementary, they had disproved that, but anyway. And we found out that the atom has subatomic particles. Well, the ego has what we call subpersonalities. And so it's not all of us that it's evil, it's just a part of us. We have something called the shadow. We have the Yoda part, Darth Vader. Anyway, what I'm saying is there are ways to explain this in modern thought that doesn't mean we're completely evil or ignorant, that there are parts of us that can hear. I follow this thing called psychosynthesis, where his model of the psyche shows the higher and lower unconscious even. And this is where Shinran says, the two aspects of deep mind. When we can really access the deepest, lowest part, the upper Amida part engages us. And so there is a model in some of psychology that can explain Shinran's thinking, how our consciousness works. And so this, let's see. The ego, I think we just have to accept it, that it's there. As ordinary people, we need that to survive. And yet to balance the ego, well, I have a talk on, rather than diminishing the ego, to expand the ego. I'll say it very quickly. I talk about Gandhi, Martin Luther King. Did they have small egos? They had huge egos. Gandhi is all of India. Martin Luther King is all oppressed people. We should be like that. Can we do that? That's pretty difficult. Anyone have kids? Anyone who has a wife and kids, especially kids, your ego already includes that, right? Their lives are more important than yours. We do that automatically. Some of you are at the temples really helping out. Your egos includes that temple or the city or the country going off to war as a soldier. We as individuals take on an ego of a larger self. This is interdependence. So we don't have to diminish the ego, which, as I said, is very, in psychology, if you're talking to your therapist and saying, I'm trying to diminish my ego, they would say, don't do that. You're going to go crazy. But we can expand our ego, expand the sense of ourselves that includes our family, our community, the country, the world, basically the world. And so it's just a different way of saying and doing things that in this practical world, I think works. Instead of trying to do something that is psychologically intolerable.
Great, thank you. And we have a question coming in from Clyde. It's not so anonymous because it says it's from Clyde. And he says, is practicing gratitude the same as being truly grateful? Or will the practice eventually lead to maintaining gratefulness for everyone and everything on a spontaneous and permanent, and more importantly, a very personal relationship with Amida basis?
No, it may or may not. It's conscious, it's intentional. You're just saying thank you all the time. But again, like the monk who was sweeping the temple, one day it may hit you. Clear away the dust. Thank you. It may just hit you, and it would just come out spontaneously. But if you don't have that practice, it won't happen. If you want to be a great baseball player and you practice a little bit, will you be Ted Williams? All the great athletes had talent, but the great athletes practice. They did more than their peers. So initially it is, conscious. It's nothing may happen. You're just saying it. But again, in every language, thank you or gratitude has meaning. And at some point it may wake you up. And it is a conventional way of reaching Amida, which is kind of out there. Again, what is Amida? enlightened life and, wisdom and compassion. Yes, but then if we think of it as other people, my parents, and, we do, as Shin Buddhists, talk about this. So we do talk about these things, but I'm putting it in a way that hopefully others can, other lay people can talk to other lay people in terms of being helpful and not just rely on ministers to convey the deeper technical explanation. And it is the efforts of others, teachers, parents. I'm here because of them. So,
Any final questions from our in-person audience? Folks, last chance. And any closing comments from George?
Yeah, just one comment. When
Kenji?
you're talking about, the importance of practice, and I'm having a senior moment. I can't remember the name of the very famous pianist, but I do remember what he said once. And he said it's Rubinstein. Yeah. Practice, practice, practice. That's what practice, practice, practice. And then you reach a point when you play the piano, it's not me playing, it's God playing the piano. Yeah. Natural.
Yeah, I like jazz, and the way these musicians play, they just play. The music just comes out.
But it takes practice.
That takes
I mean,
practice.
you and I couldn't just sit here
Right.
and improvise, right? I mean, it'd be horrible.
No, I would like feedback, because it helps me to realize what I'm saying and what people are hearing. And again, this Wednesday, GCOM is sponsoring the talk, and it will be the next step. What do we do after we say thank you? And it is looking at Shin Buddhism from a contemporary scientific perspective. And again, it's just explaining things, explaining our mythology, which is very deep and true, but putting common words to that and seeing it with things that we know is true, from our science, that on an everyday level, we may see things differently but from a scientific level, life is different. And again, this is where Shinran, especially the Buddha, knew things intuitively. They did learn it from past masters, but these masters just had things intuitively and shared it in the best way they could.
Okay. Well, thank you so. Here, here. Oh, Alan.
You gave the story about. I'm sorry. When you gave the story about the Portland church, my son and daughter-in-law lived in Portland for a while, and my son was going to I guess some of the lessons that Reverend Gibbs was giving, after service and things like that. But I've always been concerned about what would Jodo Shinshu look like without the Japanese-ness. Because I think that's a big part of our hang up is there's so much Japanese-ness in the teachings or in the whatever you call it, the whole atmosphere of the thing.
It's my thought that Buddhism has influenced Japanese culture, because I think Chinese Buddhism looks different than Indian Buddhism. Korean and Japanese Buddhism looks different than Chinese Buddhism. So it's what is American Buddhism? Well, it's come back in a couple of 100 years.
Yeah, no, but that's the big challenge, I mean, Indian Buddhism goes to China, it becomes Chinese Buddhism. Chinese Buddhism goes to Japan, becomes Japanese Buddhism. Japanese Buddhism comes to Hawaii, it still remains Japanese Buddhism. So the great challenge is for us to turn it into an American Buddhism. And I think there are certain steps, if we look back in the historical process, involve language. We're going to stop using Japanese. We need to do everything in English so that everybody can understand it, because pretty much nobody or very few people use Japanese as a workable language in their lives. And then there are all the different customs, now it's time for spaghetti instead of sushi. That's not too hard to do. And so I think, that's the great challenge for Jodo Shinshu or any other form of Buddhism in America is to become American Buddhism. And, the thing is, when we talk about American Buddhism, it's not like it's something that we have yet to achieve. There is something called American Buddhism. There are hundreds of groups on the mainland and a few here that are really American Buddhism. Most of them have come out of other denominational traditions than Jodo Shinshu, but I think every denomination has a chance to evolve to the point where they become American Buddhism. Part of the issue here in Hawaii is institutional. We're still Betsuin, we're still under the aegis of headquarters in Japan. And, the time will have to come when we move away from that. Training and ordination of priests have to be done here. And there are lots of movements, like you're going to be involved with talking with young ministerial candidates. And that process is ongoing and has to be completed at some point where everything is done our way. We shouldn't have to worry about how the Japanese do it any more than they worried about how the Chinese do it, any more than the Chinese worried about how the Indians did it. We need to do it our own way. And so we are free to interpret and to modify and to change things. And we should not be holding to this rule about, oh, you can't do that. Why not? Oh, because we never did it before. No, we're free to do anything we want in order to make this sensible to the people we're talking to. And, the generations are moving on. My grandsons, I'm just shocked by their sense of cultural or ethnic awareness. My two grandsons, when we were talking about ethnicity, my wife is Caucasian, so my son is Hapahaole. He married a 100% Chinese American woman, and my grandsons were wondering, "Oh, what are we?" So I said, "Well, figure it out. Look at your parents, and you're the totality, the combination of both. So what's your mother? Now she's 100% Chinese American, 5th generation, but still ethnically Chinese American." And they go, I said, "You don't know?" No, we know. She's white. Huh. I was like taken aback. I said, "Okay, how about your dad? Look at grandma and grandpa, and they go, he's Hawaiian." I said, "Well, there you go. You got your answer. You're a white Hawaiian." I mean, the sense of ethnic identity is really different from our generation or even my son's generation. They're now, the way how we count, 5th generation. And it's a new world. And if we want to attract them, we need to figure out ways in which we talk their language, or else they're not going to come.
I think
what does it even mean to be Japanese?
Yeah.
Well,
I think Jensen Kong probably talked about this last year, that, we are the refuge. Buddhism is in America, as we said. Meditation, mindfulness are American, but we lost our identity in saying this is Buddhist. And I wouldn't like that to happen with gratitude, because that is a way. I don't know if it's Japanese. I think it's Buddhist. And that we need to adopt ways of living. And this is why I think action, doing something is very American. Sitting on a pillow, people are sitting on pillows for 10 years and looking for something else. I think we have it in Shin.
In terms of in terms of talking about what we could term, and I have a hard time with this, American Buddhism or whatever country Buddhism or whatever it might be. It exists. It's Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, right? You talked about it. You talked about how when you read the book, it's Buddhism, but Buddhism doesn't get the credit. And I don't think Buddhism really cares whether it gets the credit, whether it's on Oprah's book club and the guy's making millions of dollars, whatever it is. In terms of actionable things, though, when we're talking about, I think, and I guess my question to you, Kenji, is you brought up a point where when you were in your schooling and you did Aikido, and what I gained from what you're talking about is this experience of awareness. And as someone who's done Aikido for years, Aikido is about awareness of energy and moving that energy or utilizing that energy. And so that mindfulness, that awareness of it is, do you think that that has something to do with why it's used so much in understanding Buddhism and understanding this mindfulness or this awareness of Amida and acceptance?
I think that's the power of ritual, that we do things, seeing impermanence with the burning of incense, chanting this sense of interdependence, many individual voices chanting as one. All these rituals are physical. And so I'm using that example of Aikido, of working with a client, but having a physical experience of what that is, feeling that energy. And then that brings up an awareness much faster than talking about it. And so by people trying to remember to say thank you, they may skip a day and then third day say, oh, I forgot to say thank you for anything yesterday. It brings up a thought that, oh, I could be doing something physically. But again, this leads to eventually Namandavs, which is that spiritual level, that when people get to our age, Namandavs has deep meaning. It's not just, oh, the minister says this a lot, and we say it 3 times. I intentionally confused people in San Diego when I got there because I wouldn't say it and wait for a response. I just say Namandavs, Namandavs. And people were waiting for me to stop it so they could say. I think it should be spontaneous, and you could say it as loud as you want, silently, however. But anyway, just to get it as a personal experience where you have your own personal experience of it. Gratitude is one of those experiences. But as Dr. Bloom said, it really expands. It's just the beginning, and it's familiar. So, yeah, thank you for the question.
Well, thank you everyone for your attendance and kind attention. You at least did a couple hours of the practice of listening. So, congratulations, and hope that, you found this, rewarding. And we'd like to, thank Kenji and George. Maybe just a little round of applause from in-house. And I hope you joined in on the Zoom land at the same time. So thanks again. And, we plan to have a 24th annual, Bloom Futaba, lecture series. And so keep an eye out on that. So thank you again. Namo Amida Butsu.